Today's excerpt from the Acts of the Apostles speaks of the institution of the order of deacons without referring to that term as such. The early church continues to use the term very soon after this account, but we hear about these men who who embody in their very being, right down to our own deacons, the balance of the Benedictine order, ora et labora, pray and work, that as a whole the church's ministry is one of prayer and work, and that it's something that to an individual we embody to differing degrees in differing points in our lives and even in our days, that we must be about both, and that we might be too eager to maybe pigeonhole one or another of those domains of life, to say that we're praying, and so our prayer is our work, or to say, well, we're working, so our work is our prayer. They are never to the exclusion of one another. Martha and Mary embodying archetypally the contemplative way of life, like in the case of Mary sitting at the Master's feet, Martha embodying the active way of life. They are sisters to one another. We must never forget that they are both strains of life are necessary, vital for the church's existence and for our own, even though maybe by temperament or by circumstances we might be more about one than the other. Our work in the world may be finished at a later point in life, or maybe incapacitated by one or another reason. So our prayer tends to occupy center stage. And the opposite could be the case. We could be very much immersed in the affairs of the world. Remember those days, right? And maybe some of you, most of you, or many of you still have been during this corona tide, that we've been less into things as we wished or needed to be. But when we were, the prayer seemed to wane a bit. So it's always trying to bring them both into focus in our lives as two poles that are not opposite one another, but the tension between them too, the prayer and the work in our lives, always seeking one to speak to the other and one to speak through the other, always our task in life. And we can do that, and we can do it with a sense of confidence in the Lord's knowledge of our lives and his desire for us to work within them, because it's all we have to work within our own lives, our own skill set and ill set, to be able to, and above all, we're working through his grace. Never forget that. Always looking to the I am, to God, who revealed himself to be existence unqualified by time or place. That's what the name that he gave to Moses on Mount Sinai means. I am means I will be who I will be. I am what it means to exist. And according to Father Felix Just, compiled a lot of great information about the scriptures, 45 times that occurs in John's Gospel, whether simply in the what they call the absolute sense of it. I am, before Abraham was, I am. Right? Or the predicative way of looking at it. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the gate, as we heard the other week. In the other people who speak in John's Gospel, who are relatively few, we might note, they tend to say, I am not this or that. It's as if to say that all identity, all existence except that of God is limited and somehow qualified. So Jesus refers to himself today as the way, the truth, and the life. In the greater context, we see how in John's Gospel, we have a very lofty layout of the Lord's life. There's no mention of a childhood. What do we hear in the beginning? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word. So his eternal coexistence with the Father in the Holy Spirit is laid out from the get-go, as opposed to Matthew and Luke, where we have infancy narratives, childhood accounts. It's a very different approach in John. For all the miracles that we hear about in the other Gospels, John has only 7 depicted, only 7 of them. And they are all followed by some lengthy discourse or, lecture almost on the nature of the interplay of darkness and light, or sin and righteousness. There's no mention of the Eucharist. For the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have the institution narrative, right? This is my body, this is my blood. No mention of that. But when Jesus washes feet, of all things, shows us the pattern of prayer-filled service, then we have, I am the bread of life, earlier in John's Gospel, chapter 6. Can't get much more Eucharistic than that, even if you don't hear precisely how he, as bread of life, should continue to be present on our altars. So the Gospels are working together here. But I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus says this in a more immediate context to reassure the apostles and all of his followers. To reassure them, because not long before that, he said, I'm going to suffer and die. And you guys who have been with me won't be with me. One of you is going to betray me. And Judas kind of figures that out very quickly, or seems to be convicted or compelled of that. And off he goes. And even Peter, our champions, I would never do that. Well, you will. Very fearsome things to hear. So that's no wonder how their hearts might be troubled at that point. Do not let your hearts be troubled. I have indeed gone to prepare a place for you. That you are dear to my heart so much that, when Peter had said in the Transfiguration, let's build booths. Let's make some tents. Keep this moment alive. Remember, it actually brings us back to when David, in his time, wanted to build a house for the Lord. And the Lord answered and said, no, you're not going to do that for me. I'm going to do it for you. I am going to prepare a place for you. That's the situation of the disciple always. Shiftless and aimless and in need of a way. So easily prone to deception and to meaninglessness, and therefore in need of truth. Joyless and nihilistic, and in need of life. So if there's a promise that is going to deliver upon that, how bold it must be, and how bold must be the one promising, and what he will have to need to back it up. Recall, too, that if there are so many I am statements, there are that many if you are statements. I am this and that. You are this and that. And what are you? What am I? A chosen race, a living stone, rejected, as we often are, especially when we live Christ in our lives. Chosen and precious in the sight of God, a royal priesthood, capable wherever we are, whatever we're doing, praying, working, capable of offering sacrifice, capable of declaring and living out the truth